Hello there. Today we're going to replace this nut. I've taken a razor blade and scored alongside here just to make it easier. I know that I put a tiny bit of super glue on this nut face, or on the face of the fretboard, so it should not be difficult. But what we're going to do is we're going to try to pull this out, and it should, I loosened it a little bit earlier, so, but for purposes of demonstration, do it slowly and carefully, because you get stuff like that happening and it can be a pain in the rear end to remove. See, now we've got just a little bit left, and what I'm going to do, if I can find one, well, here, this will work. I'm going to take a little screwdriver and just do one of those numbers. Now what I've done, there's sandpaper down here. You see the white stuff on it? I've got a blank, and what I did was make sure both of these surfaces were flat and parallel. And I'm going to check the fit on this, and it looks to me like it fits. Let's turn it around, see if it'll drop down. No. So what we have is a situation where, if you see, that does not quite fit. So I'm gonna see if there's any glue stuck there, and it doesn't look like there is. So what I'm going to do, if I can find it, it's always if I can find it, because you have to be careful doing this. If I can find the right file to do it with, because you can end up widen the slot the wrong way. So, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little miniature file here. Instead of sanding forever on a slot or the instead of laying this flat, see how thin it is, and trying to sand this to thickness, what I'm going to do, what I'm going to try to do anyway, is widen this slot just a little bit. I fit this nut in this guitar when I made it. Okay. Alright, that's close. So what I'm going to do now, because I don't want to get this slot all funky, I'm going to do one of these numbers. Well, let me check it before I do that and make sure. Yeah, still needs a little bit. We're going to fit this. sand. It's a tiny little thing, so it'll have a tendency to fly out of your hands. All kinds of things. Also, check the other side. Yeah, see? Because the blank might be slightly thinner on one edge. But I want this pretty tight. I don't want... Be careful you don't break it moving it in and out of the slot. And turn it around as you're sanding it. Make sure you get it. What I'm doing, I'm probably going to put more pressure on my thumb just by default. So this is the end that I need. Actually, let's see. Oh yeah. Okay, so what I need to do now, if I can find that. Here it is. I have a half pencil. It's just a pencil cut in half. I want to sharpen it a bit. And what I'm going to do, your fret should not, or your slots will never be lower than this nut, but you can safely take them down to the height of that, or this fret rather. That fret, when you put a caper on the guitar, they lay against the frets. So the nut doesn't have to be any higher than this fret, or the rest of the frets for that matter. And what I'm doing, I'm going to do that. And I'm going to mark the width of the nut. And it'll take a little bit of trimming to get that right regardless. But if you look, if I can get this, we have the fretboard radius on this nut. So we're going to move this guitar and set up a vise and work on this. We'll be back in a little bit. For you, it'll be a second or two. Okay, we're here at the vise, and what I'm going to do, you have to be careful not to break this piece of bone. It's fragile. So I'm going to take this saw. I need my headset first. Magnifying headset, it's a good thing, especially as you get older. But I'm going to take this saw and be careful that you don't drop it and break it. Be careful, you will break it if you're not. But I'm just sawing very carefully as close as I can to that line without actually hitting it. And the thing of it is, look, I could do this. You'll see professional luthiers that will use a belt sander or an oscillating spindle sander or some type of powered sander to do this. I don't have those articles. I don't have those. They're not in my wheelhouse. And they probably won't be for a very long time, although I may end up, if I can afford it, finding a cheap one. But this can be done entirely by hand. It just takes a little bit longer, but if you're like, ooh, gotta be careful. If you're like, you know, if you don't have the gear and you don't want to pay somebody to do this work, it can be done by yourself. You need a few specialized tools. One set of tools in particular. And we will get to that when we start to use them. What you can see, or you should be able to see, I got close to that line. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to cut off. I'm going to leave some bone on either side. If I could stop my hands from shaking, that would be so good. It's shaking, they're shaking so much of sliding out of the thing. I'm sorry about that. There's nothing I can do about it. Be careful you don't cut your fingers under there like that either. Just saying. Be careful how much you tighten that up. You want it tight enough to hold it, but you want to be careful because you will break this bone if you're not careful. And what I'm doing, I'm cutting so that I can kind of meet in the middle instead of sawing straight down. Okay. Just be careful. Be careful. There it is. Alright. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this mill file and I'm going to smooth that. You won't be able to see it, but I'm just going to smooth this top. I'll show you what I'm doing when I get back. Just hang on a minute. And I'm just eyeballing that line and trying to make sure that everything is as even from that line as I possibly can. Like that. And then we're going to the guitar and we'll be right back. Alright, we're back. What I've done, I've laid this flat on my bench and I have fitted this nut so that it is fitted to the sides. And what I'm going to do now is from the base side, I want to go an 1/8 of an inch in. And from the treble side, I choose to come in 3/32 of an inch. Alright, and what I'm going to do whoops, that happens too. That's not a big deal. And I'm going to come it's difficult to do. Alright, now what I want to do now is take a measurement with a and I'm going to do this in millimeters just because I think it'll be easier. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure this, the distance between these two marks that I've made, and that's 36.86 millimeters. Let me write that down. Alright, the camera shut off for some reason. I do not know why. I actually want to bring this over just a hair, I think. Let me see. This actually, I think, this is the fun part. I think these are fairly even, and this needs to come that way. What you think? I think that's right. Let's see. I want to set this saw down before I cut myself. I want to set that back there like that. And I'm marking both sides of the string so I can sort of pick the middle. This saw is 10 thousandths, so it should, the string should sit in there really good. Yeah, that crowd's there. I think that's where I'm going to cut them. So, what I want to do now is I want to take this saw and set it aside. This is a 46 thousandth file. The string gauge that I use is a 42. You want to leave a little bit of space, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut down to the slot. And a lot of people will cut this slot flat. You want to give it just a little bit of angle because the strings do drop down to the tuners. It doesn't need as much as what you'd find on an angled headstock. And I'm just cutting down to the, and if you look, I'm not always keeping that. I'm doing one of these numbers because I want the slot to kind of do this so that it supports the string all the way through that slot and not just on the very edge of this. I'm going to tighten it up fairly tight there. Then we're going to move to this one. We're going to use this is a 32 thousandth string. We're going to use a 36 thousandth nut slot and file. And these are the tools that you have to have. You cannot skimp. I know people go, oh, you can use map gas cleaner tips or whatever you want to call it, torch tips or whatever they call that now. Yeah, no thanks. Get a set of nut files, a good set. This one is a 24 inch or 24 thousandths. We're going to use a 24 thousandths file because that's what I have. But what we're going to do, we're going to do one of these numbers. And attempt to widen that slot. This also helps. These files have a round bottom, but it still helps to do this because that just helps to cut. You could use, I could use this saw and move it back and forth and make a round slot. That's what was done before anybody ever figured out anything about a nut slotting file. So, but the nut slotting files are worth every dime that you'll pay for them. When these files start getting thinner, be careful. Like the last one will be a 10 thousandths. Be real careful, you'll break it. I broke my very first 10 thousandth file. This is a 17,000th slot or nut file, and this is a 16,000th string here. So what I'm going to do, you could use 18, probably even 20, but just like I did before, I'm going to roll these because I want this slot to be a little bit wider than 1,000th or 1/10 or what 100th of an inch or whatever that measurement is. And so, and we're just going down to that line, just barely hitting that line. And what we're going to do is we're going to ease down till we got the right action at the first fret, and I'll show you how to do that if I don't run out of battery. But I'm going to put this here. This is an 11,000th, this 17,000th file will be perfect for that. This should be this is a 9,000th string, this last string, and I'm going to use a 10,000th and roll it just like I did all the rest of them. Just remember what I said about that file. What I'm going to do, see how that sticks in that slot? Okay, you know why it's grabbing? Look at that. It's already a chip in that. There we go. See? So you gotta be really careful with such a thin file. But you need one of these for an electric, for setting up electric guitars, because you know, if the guy's playing nines. Now, what I'd like to get, if I can find it, maybe Mr. Stumac has it, I don't know, we'll find out. It's like a 12,000th file. That would work all the way down to like 8s. Okay, so that don't look too bad. So now what I'm going to do, in order to cut these slots properly, I don't know if I can show it to you. Stand by. What I want to do is bring the string up to pitch, and I want to press here. And this is an old school way of setting up. This is how I set up. I don't take a fret thickness gauge and measure 18 thou here or what the heck ever the number is. I press this down here, and then I'm going to look at the space between the top of this fret and the bottom of these strings. And I'm just going to keep filing away until I get about 10 thousandths relief when I press down at the 3rd fret. That's the deal. So I'll be back. Alright, so that's the nut finished. I did not show some of it because it's I couldn't get the proper angle. But what I did was I cut the nut slots to the proper depth. A lot of people online will say, a lot of technicians online will say 18 thousandths, but like I said, what I did was press it down to here and look for about a 10 thousandths gap underneath this first fret. And then what you do is most people will tell you the wound strings should be buried about halfway into the nut slots, but I prefer them about 2/3 of the way. That's personal preference. And then when we get into the thinner strings, I want them at least as deep as the diameter of the string. They're smaller, they can pop out very easily. Then what I did was smoothed and rounded the corners so there's no sharp edges on it. And then took, because I didn't have anything else, normally I would go like 320, 400, 600, and then 800, and maybe even 1,000. And sometimes I might get out lapping film that's really high micron count and polish it until it comes to a really nice shine. But all I had, I don't have any of that, all I had was steel wool, and so I just polished the tops of the nut with steel wool with no issues. It's nice and smooth and doesn't have any kind of scratches or file marks or anything. And I used a mill file to bring this down. And you want to kind of keep the top of the nut as close to the same as close to that radius that you marked out with the half pencil, but you don't have to be precise on that, because the radius is being determined by the depth of the nut slots and not by the top of the nut. You just want to do that because you want it to look good. So alright, and that is the way it's done. Hope this helps somebody. I'll talk to you later.